Okay, so this is Code for Cache, September 30th, 2016. And yes, it is the first one. So the solution for this one shouldn't be too terribly complicated. We had a bunch of folks respond. What I'm going to do here is walk through the basics of what was wrong with this particular one and then show you who the winner was. So there were bunch of answers to this one. So there were a variety of issues with the unit tests, some issues with using static, areas where we could have built in some abstraction or dependency injection to use the math library, and some issues with the config file as well. So I'm going to go ahead and run the code, and then we can take a look at maybe why there were some issues with it. So code itself, not terribly complicated. It's just going to take in some numbers to add up and call out to this little library. Only thing the library does is check to see if negative numbers should be included, and if they are not supposed to be included, then they're right here, they're filtered out. And then if they are supposed to be included, they just go ahead and sum it up. So go ahead and run this project. This is just the default page that shows up for a standard ASP.NET application. I'm going to go ahead and run the service. And you can see what I did here is just passed in a couple of parameters. You can see there's some interestingness with passing in parameters that have the same name. If you do that, what it'll do is handle those as a collection. So you can see I'm passing them in at the same name of add-ins. And there's 2, 3, 4, and -9. We'd see that the value there that came back is 9. Let's go ahead and see why. So go ahead and debug this. And when you're running locally, you'll debug the IS Express process. Okay. And we'll set our breakpoint here. Run another one through. And you can see that it's taken in that add-ins property. It's just that single one, but it does treat it as a list because each one of the things in the list have the same name, and it just concatenates all those together. That is actually part of the HTTP spec, so that is expected behavior. See, there's a little thing here where it's decorating it with from URI, so it is looking at it in the query string for those properties. Continue to debug in. Check to see if I should ignore negative numbers. The answer to that is true. It should. And it'll execute here. Again, just filtering out the ones that are greater than 0. Return the value back out. And that's the explanation as to why we're getting 9 there instead of 0, because I did pass in -9, but the total value is 9. So that looks like that's working fine. So if you see why we might have some issues with this, it'll come in pretty clear when we want to run a basic unit test. So just writing a very simple unit test against the controller, passing in a couple of parameters here. 11 and 42, we expect that answer to be back to be 53. All right, so I'm just going to run this test here and see what we get. And looks like we had a failure. And argument exception value cannot be null, so that's kind of odd. Let's go ahead and debug into this one. So going in, that doesn't look too crazy. Coming in here, yeah, got the parameters I'm expecting. Oh, uh-oh. Argument null exception not handled in user code. So it looks like we're getting a null on reading the information out of the config file. All right, so let's see. We'll start this one again. we'll take a look at what .NET saw for the config file. And open up our immediate window here. I'm going to rerun this. And look, so the keys that we have are just this test project retarget to 35 allowed. So this is one of the solutions that was provided that we're utilizing a config file in the library project. But that config entry is actually defined in the controller project. So trying to get that config entry is gonna have a problem unless we define that config entry inside of the unit test project as well. So one solution to this problem, and I'm sure most of you have seen this before, is we can go inside of the unit test project and we can add a post build event to copy the config file from, copy the config file from the parent directory. So we're testing the CodeForCache project. It has a web config, and that web config has an entry in there where it's going to be looking for that should be negative, should check for negative or not. So if we add this in here and do a rebuild, and then go ahead and run this test again. And go to our immediate window and check to see what keys we have now. You can see that the should ignore negative numbers is part of the scope. And so if we continue to debug this, it ignores them as expected. And let this complete. And now we have a passing test. So that looks like it's functioning as expected. Now the problem we have here is that we have a config entry that is not really associated to me trying to test the math controller. So I don't really want to be dealing with some of this complexity. So the math controller just calls out to this math library some integers. So I don't really want to test this when I am testing my math controller. I just want to test that it's doing what I expect it to do. So as detailed out in some of these possible solutions, we'd want some way to dependency inject this in. There are a variety of ways of doing that. So I could take in a default parameter of a math library. So I could do something along those lines. If I wanted to, I could take it in the constructor of the math controller. I could expose this as a property and override that math library property. So there's a variety of ways I can dependency inject it in, but the issue that we're going to run into is if this sum integers is actually a static, and we're not able to test or mock out the static methods. So this is kind of a danger of using statics, is that let's say that I had some more complicated code here than just the basic config file read. I would have a real hard time trying to mock that out and set up all those things in order to make this code execute. So if I was doing database updates or calling other services, I might have a really hard time allowing my code that I want to test to execute this method. So a better solution to that problem is to not allow this to be static. And there's a pretty easy way to get around that. So if I'd like to create an instance member, so public math library instance, and then I'm going to create a backing member for this, so private I'll go ahead and use that backing property. So get return. All right, so now I'm using an instance variable, and I no longer need this to be static. I can actually mark this virtual. So for mocking purposes, I can mock that out. I did break the interface though, so if I were to try and build this now, that's broken because I'm trying to access something in a static context. So um, if I were to use the instance variable now, I kind of get the best of both worlds that I'm accessing this in a static fashion, which is actually what I want, right? So I do want to access this in a static fashion. Um, this was a little bit of obfuscation here, just intentional trying to confuse you. The math library getting newed up and all that stuff. It wasn't actually using anything that was on an instance variable, so we can get rid of all this stuff. It was actually accessing a static method, so having a local property with that is kind of pointless because we were only accessing static fields on it. So now everything's happy where my code is accessing this in a static fashion, which is what it wants to do. But now I have the opportunity to where I can inject in at compile time, I'm sorry, at runtime, a value for this instance that is a mock value. So this technique is pretty powerful for giving you a way to inject in at unit test time uh, something that you could then mock out, uh, but then still giving the consumers of whatever code you have the look and feel that they want. So this code has no interest in holding on to an instance of math library. It doesn't know any of library's dependencies. So if there was a database connection or something that would have to come in on the constructor, it doesn't know any of those things. It just is interested in calling out some integer. So again, this gives you the ability for your consumers to have the interface that they want, at the same time giving them the ability to test it out. So over in your unit tests, you would be able to inject in. So if I were to create so math library, and I could have that equal to, new mock of whatever I would like to mock that out as. So this technique is now allowed to overwrite that instance with a mock, and then I can run my unit tests based on that mock. So that was again another solution that was provided. So that should be everything for this particular one. Let's see who the winner is. So I'm going to created a little random name picker here, and it should just go through the possible winners, and we'll pick the person that won. And there we go. So Becky is the big winner. So this could be you next time. So Becky, congratulations. You'll be getting your gift card. Stay tuned for the next one. Thank you.